Lonely rancher notices bruises on his cook. Days later, armed strangers showed up at his door. What he did next didn't just save her life. It set off a war the whole town tried to forget. If this story hit you right in the heart or kept you on edge, don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more powerful tales like this. And stick around because what happens next changes everything. She kept herself busy in the kitchen like it might help her disappear while he filled his plate again and again, trying to forget. But the moment tenderness gave way to bruises, the quiet man next door couldn't ignore what he saw, and the choice he made afterward cracked open a secret their small town had buried deep. The skillet hissed with sudden heat, a sound like a warning just as Rachel turned from the stove. Her sleeve had slipped again, sliding down her arm, and this time Jacob Hayward caught a glimpse. The edge of a bruise, deep and discolored like spoiled fruit beneath the skin, peeked out before she managed to pull the fabric back into place. He didn't speak right away, didn't call her out. He just watched her face. Rachel didn't react, didn't meet his eyes. She set the pan down like nothing had happened and asked if he wanted more. "Your biscuits are burning," Jacob said quietly, even though they were already too far gone. He just needed her to look away for a second, and she did. The ranch held its usual stillness, the breeze threading through the cottonwoods, a mule braying somewhere in the distance, cattle murmuring low as night came on. But Jacob couldn't settle, not this time. He'd hired Rachel about half a year ago, a woman who said she was a widow and needed the job. He needed someone to help keep the place running. She was plain-spoken, courteous, dependable, never late, never asked for more than her wages, and a quiet corner room near the pantry. He knew hardly anything about her, but tonight the quiet between them felt different. It had weight now, like something long buried had finally surfaced. Jacob wasn't a man who pried. The last time he asked too many questions, his wife died and their unborn child with her. That kind of heartbreak teaches a man that curiosity can cost you everything. Still, when Rachel poured his coffee and flinched just a small twitch as her hand brushed the rim of the mug, he noticed. Another bruise, this one circling her wrist. The silence stretched thin. Rachel caught it. She stood a little straighter, turned as if to leave, but his voice cut across the kitchen like a rope snapping tight. "Who did that?" She froze, not turning, not breathing, just still. "I'm not blind, Rachel," he said a little gentler now. "And you're not the clumsy type. So who hurt you?" The quiet that followed lasted longer than most Sunday sermons Jacob had ever sat through. When she finally turned to face him, there was no fear in her expression. No defiance either, just exhaustion. "Doesn't matter," she said. "It's over." Jacob pushed his chair back, the scrape of the legs echoing sharp in the kitchen. "That's not what you believe," he told her. "I believe it's none of your concern," she replied, folding her arms, not to stand her ground, but to hold herself together like letting go might make her fall apart. "You hired me to cook. That's what I'm doing." But it wasn't just that anymore. Not now. Something inside her had started to come undone, and he could see it, the tiny shifts he hadn't pieced together until tonight. The way she startled at sudden sounds, the mornings she lingered in bed longer than usual, how she wore gloves even while snapping beans, how she'd stare into the fire too long like it was whispering something she didn't want to hear. "You got kids?" Jacob asked out of nowhere. Rachel blinked. "No. Family. None that count." "So you're alone." Her jaw tightened. "Been that way most my life." Jacob stepped in, not threatening, not soft either, just close enough that she had to meet his eyes. "You're not alone here," he said. "Not unless you want to be." That cracked something open in her, just a hairline fracture. Her lips trembled for a heartbeat before she set them firm again. He didn't push. He just walked to the back door, pulled it open, and looked out across the fields where dusk was slowly folding itself into night. Cattle clustered together in the distance while the wind tugged at the porch lantern, making it groan softly in the night air. Jacob didn't sleep that night. Long past midnight, he could hear movement in the kitchen, the faint clatter of utensils, the scratch of a chair being nudged back. He nearly got up, nearly said something, but when he nudged open the bedroom door, he saw her sitting at the table, a scarf wound tightly around her wrist as she slowly peeled an apple, the fruit already bruised and browning in the open air. She wasn't crying, just staring at it like it was telling her something. The next morning, she was back in long sleeves. The marks were hidden again, but Jacob couldn't erase the image or forget the way she said nothing when he asked who had done that to her. A few days later, while mending the barn's latch, Jacob noticed tracks pressed into the dirt wagon wheels, fresh and deep, definitely not theirs. Someone had come by after dark, stopped near the pantry window, and then vanished. He went inside, his expression tight. Rachel was scrubbing the floor on her knees, sleeves pushed up. He knelt beside her and asked, "Who's been showing up here?" She stayed quiet. "Don't lie," he said, lowering his voice. "I saw the tracks." She went still, then whispered barely loud enough to catch. "He keeps coming. No matter where I go, he finds me." Jacob felt the cold crawl into his bones. "Who is he?" Her hands started to shake. "His name's Luther Kane." The name didn't register with Jacob, but the look on her face said everything. "You want me to go to the sheriff?" he asked. She shook her head hard. "No. The law's never lifted a finger for me. He's got people in all the right places. Money keeps their mouths shut. I've watched it happen." Jacob stood up, jaw clenched. "Then maybe it's time somebody finally said something." Rachel looked up, startled. "You don't even know who I am," she said. "No," Jacob replied. "But I know what it feels like to lose someone you love and live every day wondering if you could have done more. I'm not going through that again." That night she made stew. She barely spoke, but when she set his bowl down, there was care in the way she did it, and for the first time her hands were steady. But neither of them noticed the shadow watching from the trees as dusk stretched across the land. Morning came wrapped in a dull gray sky, bitter with wind, and Rachel's eyes matched the color as she handed Jacob his coffee without saying a word. He didn't speak either, not right away. The way she moved, calm but alert, like she was bracing for something to fall out from under her, told him that whatever they'd stirred up last night had pulled loose something she'd buried deep. And Jacob knew too well how silence made pain take root. He stood on the porch watching as she hung clothes near the barn, sleeves tugged low even with the sun already warming the fields. A clothespin slipped from her hand, and as she bent to grab it, she froze halfway. Somewhere overhead, a crow called out, but Rachel wasn't looking up. She was staring past the fence line out toward the road that led into town. Jacob followed her gaze and saw what she saw, a lone rider on a dark horse moving slowly, deliberately, the kind of man who didn't need to rush because fear paved the way for him. Rachel turned and walked back inside. Jacob met her at the doorway. "That him?" he asked. She nodded, her face pale. Jacob stepped out, unhooking the shotgun from its place by the door. "He don't look so tough from here." "He's not," Rachel said quietly. "He doesn't have to be." They watched the rider stop just outside the fence. He didn't call out, didn't dismount. He just sat there like a predator studying the coop. Then, just as quietly as he came, He turned the horse and melted back into the trees. Rachel let out a long, shaky breath and sank into the nearest chair, like the only thing that had kept her standing was stubborn pride. Jacob remained at the door, shotgun in hand. The image of the man's face burned sharp into his memory. "I'm going to town," he said. "No," Rachel's voice cracked louder than she meant. "Don't go to the sheriff. I told you he won't help. No one will. Luther owns most of the county judges, deputies, even pastors. He throws money at churches, shows up at holiday drives, buys presents for orphans every Christmas. You walk in there talking about bruises and me, and they'll laugh you out of the building. I'm not going to the sheriff," Jacob said, stepping into the room and resting the shotgun beside the table leg. "I'm going to find a man who used to ride with the Rangers before he retired out here with one eye and a limp. He doesn't care who your friends are, he only cares about justice." Rachel looked up, disbelief flickering in her eyes, fighting against something that looked a lot like hope. "You'd do that for me?" Jacob nodded. "It ain't about doing it for you. It's about doing what's right." He left before she could respond, saddling his mare and heading east, dust curling behind him in soft spirals. Rachel stood at the edge of the porch watching him ride off, and for the first time since she'd arrived on his land, she felt something unfamiliar stir quietly inside her, something that almost felt like safety. The ranch stayed still while Jacob was gone, but Rachel's nerves were another story. She kept glancing over her shoulder, pausing in the middle of chores to peer through windows or press her ear to the back wall, every sound setting her on edge. By the time the sun began to dip, she was in the pantry organizing jars when she heard a board creak behind her. She spun fast, heart pounding in her chest. But it was just Emmy Jacobs' ranch hand, barely 17 cheeks, still carrying the softness of youth. "Miss Rachel," he said, fidgeting with the brim of his hat. "There's a man at the gate asking for you." Her stomach clenched. What kind of man? The type that doesn't blink much. Tall, wears a black hat. Real polite, though. Said he had a message. Rachel brushed past him so fast she nearly sent a shelf of preserves crashing. Emmy followed behind her, uncertain like a pup, too scared to bark. When she reached the fence, she didn't see a soul, only a single white envelope nailed to the post, swaying gently in the breeze. She tore it down and unfolded it with shaky fingers. No name, no return address, just 6 simple words. "You're not worth dying for, Rachel." Ink on paper, but the message bled like it was written in something thicker. She turned to Emmy. "Go get the other hands. Lock up the barn, the chicken coop, everything. I want every soul under this roof before sunset." But now, Emmy. Back inside, Rachel bolted the doors, latched every window. She laid Jacob's shotgun across her lap and huddled in the kitchen's far corner with a blanket over her knees, listening hard to every whisper and groan the old house made, as if the floorboards might scream. Outside, the sky bled red as the sun gave up the day. Jacob returned sometime past midnight, his mare's hooves cracking like gunshots in the still. When Rachel opened the front door, the first thing he saw was the barrel of his own shotgun aimed square at him. He raised both hands. "It's me," he said gently. She lowered the weapon, breath shaky. "You came back." "Of course I did." He stepped inside, eyes scanning the space. "Did you see him? No. But he left this." She handed over the note. Jacob read it once, then again, before folding it carefully and slipping it into his pocket. "Did you find the man you went after?" she asked. "I did," Jacob said. "And he's in. Needs a name, a face, and a reason. I told him he'd have all three come morning. But Luther doesn't play fair. Jacob gave a short nod. Neither do I. They sat down at the kitchen table, the silence between them not empty, but braced. I'm not running anymore, Rachel whispered. You won't have to. He took her hand not for comfort or romance, but because sometimes the simplest touch says you're not alone. Neither of them slept that night. They kept the light's dim doors locked tight. And when the sun finally broke the horizon, it wasn't just one rider on the road, it was three. Jacob stood out on the porch, shotgun slung over his back. Beside him, Rachel gripped a revolver she hadn't touched since her brother taught her to shoot. As the riders neared, one veered off to the north, another to the south, but the one in the black hat kept coming. He stopped by the same post he'd used for the note this time, swinging down from the saddle. Jacob stepped down off the porch. The distance between them was about 10 strides of hard-packed dirt. Morning Luther called with a smile. You don't belong here, Jacob said. I'm just here for a girl. She's mine. She's never been yours. Luther tilted his head. You think you can stop me? I don't think, Jacob replied. I act. And from the shadows behind him, the one-eyed ranger stepped into the light. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence alone made the air freeze over. Tension wrapped around them all, thick and dry, as Ruth watched from behind the curtain, holding her breath like it might break the silence. Luther's grin twitched a crack, forming in the confidence he carried like armor. Now hold on, he said, his boots shifting in the dust. I didn't come here looking for blood, just a little talk. The ranger didn't slow. No need to stir things up. Luther went on, taking a careful step back toward his horse. I've got no quarrel with you, sir. Still no response. The ranger's coat flared in the breeze, revealing 2 weathered revolvers holstered at his sides, tools that had buried more trouble than most men ever met. Luther looked back at Jacob. You're making a bad bet, rancher. That woman you're protecting, she's caused headaches for men with more power than you'll ever see. She's not causing me problems, Jacob said. She's giving me something worth standing for. Luther's mouth pulled tight. You think you can fix what somebody else broke? Just pick up a damaged woman, patch her up, and call yourself a hero. No, Jacob said simply. I think I can be decent. The ranger stepped up beside him. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't flinch. Just said, voice dry and flat as bones in the desert. You're trespassing. Luther's smirk vanished. All right, I'll go. For now. But don't confuse mercy for weakness. You should leave before I confuse it with consent, the ranger said. Luther clicked his tongue, swung onto his horse in one practiced motion, and rode away. But the dust left behind didn't feel like retreat. It felt like a warning. Rachel stepped onto the porch, her hands trembling. Thank you, she whispered to the ranger. He nodded once, then turned to Jacob. I'll be in town a few days. If he shows his face again, send word. You've got people now. Appreciate it, Jacob said. By mid-morning, the ranch had settled again. But Rachel knew better than to trust quiet. She kept her hands moving, mending curtains, lining up spice jars, baking bread they didn't need. Jacob paced the fence line 3 times and said very little, the weight of what might come still pressing on his mind. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep, not because she was scared, but because memories were louder in the dark. Strange how the mind waited until you felt safest to unleash what hurt most. She lay still, hands over her stomach, staring at the rafters like they might split and drop the past down on top of her. She remembered the first time Luther had hit her, the jolt of disbelief, the way it cracked something inside. Then came the flowers, the charm, the promises. He made sure the bruises didn't show at first, said he was too smart for that. But smart didn't mean kind. Eventually, the marks came: ribs, arms, the spots pride tried to ignore. When she ran, it wasn't just from the pain. She was running from the part of herself that thought maybe she deserved it. Jacob knocked softly on the doorway. "You awake?" She nodded in the dark. "I can't stop thinking." "Me neither." He stepped inside and sat near the fire where the glow danced across the walls. "You know, my wife used to bake when she was anxious. House always smelled like cinnamon even when no one was hungry." Rachel smiled faintly. "Sounds like she was good-hearted. Too good, maybe." She passed, still believing the world was gentler than it really is. What happened to her? Jacob looked into the fire for a long moment. Fever. Took her quick. One day she was laughing at a joke from next door. Next, she was gone. "I'm sorry." He gave a small shrug. Not cold, just tired in that quiet way grief gets after years. It doesn't hit like it used to, but the echo stays. Rachel got up and walked toward the hearth, pulling her shawl tighter. "Do you think someone like me deserves a second chance?" He looked over at her. "I think someone like you deserves peace." She looked away, blinking hard. "That man, he doesn't let go. Then we won't either." Later that week, Jacob rode into town for supplies, leaving Rachel behind with the ranch hands and a chore list long enough to fill the day twice over. But by midday, something didn't sit right. Emmy and the other boys were too quiet, their energy off. When Rachel asked where they were headed, they stumbled through vague excuses that didn't match their eyes. She followed them past the fence across the field toward the grove. And there, nailed to a tree stump under the shade of the trees, she found it a letter, her real name written in fine cursive, Rachel Esther Mallory. She tore it from the wood, heart racing as she unfolded it. 1 week. Come back quiet or I drag you loud. That man you're hiding behind won't see another sunrise if you make the wrong call. L. She crushed the note in her fist and turned to the boys. "Who brought this here?" They exchanged uneasy glances until Emmy finally spoke up. "Some guy came by early, said it was for you." Rachel sprinted back to the house, grabbed the shotgun Jacob had trained her on, and stood at the window, eyes fixed on the hill, until his horse finally crested it. She met him at the gate, letter in hand, wild-eyed. "They're planning to kill you." Jacob took the note, read it silently, then folded it and slipped it into his pocket. Then they better come with more than ink next time. That night, Jacob wired the ranger. The reply was short. "Tell her to pack. We're not just standing our ground anymore. We're going to him." By the time the ranger arrived, Rachel had packed only what she could carry: 2 dresses, a Bible, and a locket that had belonged to her mother, Sarah. Jacob met the ranger at the edge of the property just as dawn lit the hills like fire. No words passed between them. Their eyes met, and a single nod was all it took, like a pact sealed without pen or paper. Where the ranger asked. Jacob pointed west. "He's holed up near Delmore Creek. Word is he built the place up real fast after she left new fences, a barn big enough for a militia stone house made to last. Figured she'd come crawling back. He won't expect her riding in with someone who doesn't crawl." Rachel stepped forward, pale but steady. "You think this'll actually work?" "No," the ranger said flatly. "But men like him only roar when they think they're untouchable. Take that away. They get real quiet." So they rode, just the 3 of them, cutting through open land like ghosts in broad daylight. Rachel wore one of Jacob's old duster's sleeves, too long, hem whipping behind her in the wind, hair tucked up beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The path narrowed as they neared the hills. Coyotes howled at twilight. They slept in turns. On the second night, Rachel broke the silence while Jacob tended the fire. "I used to dream about running away," she said, her voice barely above the flames. "But even after I left, I never felt free, not until now." Jacob didn't look up. "That's how it is sometimes. The chains don't always fall off when you leave. Sometimes they follow you." She turned toward the ranger who sat nearby sharpening a blade. "You ever married?" He didn't answer right away. Once, briefly. "What happened?" He kept working the steel. "She gave me a choice, her or the job. I chose wrong." Rachel stared into the sparks dancing off the fire. "Do you regret it?" "Every single day," he said, then stood up and disappeared into the trees. The next morning they reached Delmore Creek. Fences wrapped the land like barbed warning, coiled and cruel. The house perched on a ridge, smoke curling from its chimney. One man with a rifle paced near the barn, another leaned against the corral, chewing something bitter and scanning the road with eyes too still. "He's expecting something," Jacob murmured. "No," the ranger corrected. "He's expecting her alone. They didn't charge in. They waited until night swallowed the land, and when they moved like shadow." The ranger circled west, vanishing into darkness. Jacob and Rachel crept toward the house. Each step on the wooden plank sounded louder than it should, like guilt made into sound. Near the barn, Rachel stopped. A noise, soft, broken. A child's whimper. She turned sharply and peered through a knothole. Inside, a little girl, no older than 8, lay curled beside a chained dog, both huddled in the straw. Jacob leaned in. "You know her?" Rachel shook her head. "No, but she's what I was." That was all it took. Plans shifted. They made for the barn. The door groaned as it opened. The girl flinched, raising her arms to shield herself. Jacob crouched low. "It's okay. You're safe." She didn't believe him, not until Rachel stepped forward, knelt down, and reached for the chain. "I know what that feels like," she whispered. The girl looked up, eyes aged far beyond her years. Then slowly she gave a nod. Jacob used a tool from his saddlebag to snap the chain. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. It just leaned into Rachel's leg like it had waited its whole life for this moment. Then a voice broke the quiet like a whip. "Well now, took you long enough?" Luther stood in the doorway, rifle in one hand, torch in the other, his grin lit by flickering fire. Behind him, 2 armed men stepped forward. "You came back, Rachel, just like I said you would. Almost missed you." Rachel moved in front of the girl. "You don't get to miss me." "You should have brought flowers," Luther quipped, eyes sliding to Jacob. "And you've got a gift for bad choices, don't you?" Jacob didn't blink. "Let the girl go." Luther chuckled. "You think you're the first man to stand up to me? Think bravery gets you safety. All it earns is a shallow grave." A whistle cut the night, sharp, followed by a shot. The torch in Luther's hand burst in a spray of sparks. He reeled back, yelling. From the trees, the ranger emerged, rifle smoking, barrel steady. "Next one's not a warning," he said. Luther staggered, blood soaking his sleeve. "You'll hang for this," he growled. "I've got people." "Not anymore," said the ranger. They read the letter. The judge, the sheriff, the preacher. They know about the forged deeds, the stolen land, the girls you kept like cattle. You're a ghost now, Luther, and a ghost don't scare anyone. But Luther wasn't done. He raised his rifle, aimed straight for Rachel. Jacob lunged. They hit the ground hard, fists flying dirt, kicking up around them. Jacob didn't yell, didn't curse. He fought like a man with something to protect every strike, driven by nights spent praying she'd be safe. Every blow soaked in the understanding that peace was never handed over. It had to be claimed and kept. By the time Luther stopped moving, his face was caked in blood and dirt, barely recognizable beneath the mess. He let out one low groan, then went still. Rachel stood over him, chest heaving. "You never owned me." The little girl gripped her leg tightly. Jacob stood nearby, his jaw locked. The ranger stepped forward, knelt beside Luther, checked for a pulse, then gave a brief nod. "He'll live for now." As the sun rose over the scattered wreckage, Rachel stood at the edge of the creek, gently rinsing the girl's hands, while Jacob worked to build a fire for breakfast. The dog rested nearby, its tail swishing slowly against the earth. The ranger saddled his horse. "You two gonna be all right?" Jacob gave a quiet nod. "We are now." Rachel looked over at him, her gaze soft. "Thank you." The ranger didn't smile, but the nod he gave said enough. He turned and rode out with no ceremony, the kind of man who knew when his job was done. That night, the girl lay curled between Rachel and Jacob on a nest of old quilts, the stars above burning steady, like lanterns hung in the sky. In the hush of the dark, Jacob whispered, "What's her name?" Rachel stroked the girl's hair. "She told me once, Delilah. That's a strong name. So was mine once," Rachel murmured, "but I forgot it for a while. You remember it now?" She turned toward him, tears catching the starlight. "I do." The town of Cross Point hadn't seen Rachel Mallory in 3 years. Some said she'd thrown herself into the river. Others guessed she'd made it out west, changed her name, started over. A few murmured that Luther had finally done what everyone feared and buried her out on his land. But no one had proof, and no one had the backbone to look. So when Rachel walked into the church that Sunday morning with a child on her hip and a quiet, weathered man at her side, the congregation forgot how to breathe. Even the preacher who'd survived war flood and men like Luther paused mid-sermon and nearly dropped his Bible. Rachel walked with her shoulders square and her chin raised, but the fear still lingered behind her eyes like a shadow waiting for silence. Jacob stood next to her face, freshly shaved, boots, clean, posture, steady. The child clung to Rachel's skirt like it was home, and the dog sat just outside the church doors, refusing to be left behind. They took a spot on the back pew. Jacob held his hat with both hands, fingers curled around the brim. Rachel didn't look down once. When the final hymn drifted to stillness and folks began rising from their seats, the preacher came down from the pulpit, his steps slow and heavy on the wooden stairs. His eyes went to Jacob first, then landed on Rachel. "I buried you," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "No, sir," Rachel replied calmly. "You just stopped looking." That hit hard. He paused, took a breath, then reached out his hand. "Welcome home." The town was slower to follow. Luther's men had scattered like mice after the fight, and though no charges ever stuck, stories made the rounds. They said a lawman from back east came through and cleared ghosts off the prairie with a single bullet. They said Luther crawled off wounded and furious, headed south with what pride he had left. And they said Jacob Clay, a widower no one ever really knew, stood between danger and a woman the world had already counted out. The whispers changed over time. Doors that once slammed shut when Rachel walked past now opened with hesitant kindness. Neighbors came by with pies, worn coats, invitations to dinner. Rachel didn't accept much, but she smiled when she could. She walked Delilah to the schoolhouse each morning and waited at the fence until the girl slipped through the door. The dog stayed by her side always. Jacob fixed the fence, added a swing to the porch. He taught Delilah how to gather eggs without startling the hens, how to hold her hand flat so the horses wouldn't nip. She laughed more now, still jumped at sudden noises, still flinched if someone moved too fast, but her shoulders didn't hunch in so tight anymore. She slept through the night. It was near the end of October when Rachel asked Jacob to sit with her by the fire. They hadn't talked much since coming home, both knowing that sometimes words did more damage when rushed. That night she sat cross-legged by the hearth, knees pulled in, watching the flames like they held stories older than the house. "I never said thank you," she said. "You don't have to." "I do," she said, glancing over. "You didn't have to help me." Jacob looked at his hands. "I didn't help you, Rachel. I just did what a man ought to." She studied him quietly. Not many would have. Then, not many earn the right to be called men. A silence settled in softer this time. "I don't know how to live like this," she said quietly. "Like what he asked. Safe." Jacob leaned forward, voice gentle. "You don't have to know. Just try." From upstairs, Delilah stirred and muttered in her sleep. Rachel half rose to check on her, but Jacob laid a light hand on her wrist. "She's okay." Rachel let out a slow breath and sat back down. "She calls me Mama," she whispered. "You are." She shook her head. "Not yet. Not really. She had a mother once, but she's starting to forget. I can see it in her eyes." Jacob didn't say a word. "She deserves more than a woman made of broken parts," Rachel said. "She deserves someone who loves her," Jacob replied. "That's enough. That's everything." She looked over at him again, and in that glance sat a question neither of them dared speak, not yet. Snow came early that year. By the time frost had glazed the fence rails and turned the pasture into a field of silver, Rachel had settled into a steady rhythm. Mornings were slow and warm, filled with eggs and biscuits, Jacob humming old hymns as he split wood out back. Delilah helped in the garden, bundled into a coat far too big, gifted by someone in town, and the dog still followed her every step like a shadow. But peace is a fragile thing, something borrowed, never owned. It was midweek when the knock came, not timid or uncertain, but deliberate and sure. Rachel froze where she stood, hands dusted in flour, a half-rolled pie crust on the counter. Jacob answered the door. 3 men stood outside. They weren't from town, and they didn't wear a badge. Travelers, maybe, but more likely trouble. "We're looking for Luther." "Maze," said the tallest, a deep scar cutting down his jaw, eyes cold and humorless. "He's got something of ours." Jacob didn't flinch. "No Luther here." The man stepped forward. "He sold us a girl 9 years old, said she'd be at his place till spring. She's gone and his blood's on your barn floor." Jacob didn't move. "That your concern?" The man's mouth curled into a slow smile. "It is now." Rachel stepped into view behind Jacob, pale but steady. She saw the man's gaze shift as he tried to peer past Jacob into the house. His grin widened. "There she is." The shotgun was in her hands before he could finish his sentence. She didn't waver. Jacob didn't move. The barrel leveled against the man's chest. "She's ours," the man said. "No," Rachel replied. "She's mine." He let out a laugh. "You think that mutt's gonna save you? That girl don't even exist on paper." "I don't need paper," Rachel said. "I've got fire." The dog growled low. One more step, and the man might have tested her. But then a second knock sounded from behind the house. Rachel's heart jumped. Jacob turned. Two more men, then another. They weren't asking questions. They were closing in. The next few minutes moved fast. Jacob snatched the rifle from the wall. Rachel bolted upstairs for Delilah. The dog barked once and launched itself out the front door, catching the tall man in the legs. Chaos broke loose, gunfire, shouting, wood splintering. Rachel sprinted for the cellar with Delilah clutched tight to her chest. Jacob fired from the porch, then retreated inside as windows shattered around him. But they didn't run. They held their ground. When the sheriff finally arrived, called by the neighbor's smoke signal, the fight was already over. Two men lay dead. The rest had fled. Rachel stood outside the cellar door, coated in dust and streaks of blood. Jacob leaned against a porch post, bleeding from the shoulder eyes still burning. Delilah sobbed into Rachel's neck. Tiny fingers clenched so hard they left marks. Sheriff Tannen lowered his weapon. "You folks all right?" Jacob shook his head. "Not yet, but we will be." The preacher showed up the next day with a prayer and a plan. Neighbors followed with food blankets, nails, and tools. And Rachel, she stood straighter than she had in years. When winter deepened and the church bells rang out for Christmas, Jacob walked with Rachel and Delilah down the aisle. Not as a protector, as a man who believed in something again. And Rachel said yes, not because she needed to, not because she feared being alone, but because for the first time she believed love didn't have to come wrapped in hurt. Spring came fast that year, melting snow from the ground as if the earth itself had chosen to start fresh. Calves were born, fences fixed, and the town spoke of new beginnings like they were due after a season that had nearly swallowed them whole. But none carried rebirth the way Rachel Clay did. Her new name felt foreign at first, like trying on someone else's coat. She'd taken it quietly with no audience inside the chapel, just her Jacob, Delilah, and the preacher. The dog waited on the steps, still as a statue. No white dress, no flowers. Just vows exchanged between two souls who knew grief better than poetry. Rachel never imagined she'd be someone's wife again. Never thought she'd have a daughter, a girl who clung to her skirts and called her mama in a voice stitched with healing. But this was her life now. Every morning held the scent of fresh coffee and wood smoke, Jacob's calm presence behind her, Delilah's laughter echoing down the stairs. Still not all wounds closed clean. There were moments Rachel would stop mid-motion, kneading dough or folding laundry, eyes gone far, breath caught. Jacob never spoke in those moments. He'd just move closer, not to touch, just to be near. A quiet reminder that she wasn't alone in what lingered. Sometimes she spoke after. Sometimes she didn't. He never pressed. Delilah carried her own ghosts. She still flinched when a man raised his voice or walked too heavy. Still eyed open doorways like she expected something to step through. But she'd started drawing again, little sketches of chickens, trees, and once a house with 3 stick figures all holding hands. Rachel cried when she found that one. They framed it and hung it by the hearth. But peace never stays long in places where blood has touched the earth. Jacob saw the man first, a stranger leaning on the fence outside the church after service one Sunday. With spring came more travelers through Cross Point, but something about this man didn't sit right. He didn't speak, just stood watching. When Jacob turned toward him, the man tipped his hat and disappeared behind the church. The way he moved scraped a warning across Jacob's nerves. He didn't tell Rachel, not yet. Not until he knew more. That night he checked the locks twice. sat up longer than usual, boots still on rifle propped close. The dog, older now but alert, paced at the front door before settling down with a low, uneasy growl in its chest. The next morning, Rachel found footprints in the garden, too wide for Delilah, too large for her own. She didn't speak, just called Jacob out and pointed. He looked down, then gave a single nod. "They're watching," she whispered. He didn't disagree. Delilah played nearby, laughing as she chased butterflies across the yard with a stick in her hand and sunlight in her hair. It made Rachel's chest ache with joy and with dread. That afternoon, Jacob hitched the wagon and headed into town, said he needed seed. But he was looking for something more. In truth, Jacob went straight to Sheriff Tannen. The sheriff listened closely, nodding as Jacob described the man. Tall, clean boots didn't belong. "You think he's tied to the ones who came after Delilah? Could be, or someone worse." Sheriff Tannen stood up. "I'll post a man to circle your property each night. Quiet, no talk around town." Jacob gave a curt nod. "Appreciate it." Back at the ranch, Rachel tried to act as though nothing had shifted. She folded linens with slow precision, cooked stew from scratch, read Bible verses to Delilah before bed. But her eyes moved constantly, tracking corners, scanning windows. She kept the shotgun within arm's reach, even while stirring broth. 3 days passed. On the 4th, the dog was gone. He never wandered far, especially not at night. But that morning the porch was empty, his food untouched. Jacob scoured every inch of the land. No tracks, no blood, nothing. Just an absence so loud it pressed against the ribs. That night they heard it, a soft chime of metal on metal. The well pulley. Jacob grabbed his rifle. Rachel followed despite his protest. Together they approached the well. Tied to the post was the dog, still alive, gagged with a rag, eyes wild but unharmed. And dangling from the pulley rope just inches above the dark well mouth was a folded note. Rachel read it aloud, voice unsteady. "She's not yours." That night, Jacob moved Delilah into their room and set up a cot. The girl didn't question it. Something old and awful had crept back into their world, and she felt it. Rachel held her close. The sheriff doubled the patrol, but the man was never seen again. The fear, however, stayed. Then came the letter. No stamp, no name, just a small slip of paper slid under the front door at first light. Rachel found it. This time the words cut deeper. "You think you saved her, but she remembers. And soon, so will you." Her hands flew to her mouth. Jacob picked it up, read it twice, then tossed it into the stove and watched it burn. That night, Rachel didn't sleep. She sat near the fire, fingers twisted tight in her lap. Jacob joined her silent. "She's remembering," Rachel said. "She's safe here. She's not safe anywhere if this keeps going." He looked at her. "You want to run?" "No," she answered. "I want to fight." A soft cry drifted from upstairs. Rachel rose and hurried to Delilah's arms, already outstretched. The girl sat upright in bed, glassy-eyed. "Mama," she whispered. "He came into my dream again." Rachel froze. "Who, sweetheart?" "The man with the belt. White hair. He used to lock me in the dark." Rachel pulled her close, heart pounding. "He said he's coming back." Jacob didn't waste time. Before the sun had fully cleared the trees, he was already at the sheriff's office, speaking in low, firm tones. Rachel waited outside the general store, Delilah tucked against her side, holding the child like a barrier against the unknown. Her hands never left the girl's shoulders. "She described him," Jacob said, White hair carried a belt, locked her in dark places. Same as before. He's been showing up in her dreams again. Sheriff Tannen leaned against the porch railing, arms folded, jaw tight like he was chewing glass. And now the notes, the dog, the well. We can't pretend this is all random. No, we can't. Jacob agreed. I need to know if anyone passed through lately. Anyone who'd have reason to haunt a girl like this. The sheriff pushed off the rail. Let me check stage records. A few days ago, a man rode in from the west. Didn't stay long. Clean coat, polished boots, paid cash for everything. White hair. Sheriff nodded. Not old, but yeah, white as snow. Where'd he go? Didn't say left headed south, maybe circled around. Never gave a name. That afternoon, Rachel and Jacob reinforced every entry point on the ranch. Wooden boards across windows locks tested and retested weapons, set within reach in every room. They moved the bed to the center of the room, no line of sight from windows. The dog hadn't left Delilah's side since they found him, and Rachel never once told him to go. Each time he growled at the creak of a board or a distant rustle, she felt the fear press tighter into her chest. That evening, a sound cut through the tense calm. A whistle, one long, sharp note. Not playful, not casual, like someone calling for a dog. Jacob stood instantly, rifle in hand. Rachel swept Delilah into her arms and ducked behind the flipped table they'd repurposed as a barricade. Then came the voice, smooth, familiar, laced with venom. I've come for what's mine. Rachel's blood ran cold. Jacob stepped toward the door. You've got one chance to leave, he called out. Put your hands up. Walk away, or I swear I'll plant you where you stand. Silence, then laughter. Low, easy, sickening. You've been filling her head with lies, the voice said. But she knows me now. Don't you, little bird? Delilah whimpered. That's him, she whispered. That's the man who... She didn't finish, just buried her face in Rachel's coat and trembled. The dog growled, old muscles tight with fury. I'm counting to 3, Jacob warned. If I see a flicker of shadow, if I hear one more word, I shoot. 1, a rustle on the porch. 2, the clink of something metal, maybe a spur, maybe worse. 3, a gunshot cracked the silence. Jacob didn't hesitate. He fired hard and fast into the dark, then dropped low as a bullet splintered the wood just above his head. The man wasn't alone. 2 more figures stepped out of the shadows, rifles ready. But Jacob had been through this before. This land had been threatened once and survived. It wasn't going to happen again, because he'd see to it that this time it ended here. Gunfire cracked through the night air like thunder splitting open the dark. The dog lunged forward, jaws snapping just as one of the intruders reached for the front door. Rachel didn't scream. She simply wrapped herself around Delilah, shielding her with everything she had, whispering under her breath with a desperate tremble, "Please, God, not this time." Outside, Jacob dropped one of the men with a clean shot to the thigh. The attacker howled, his weapon clattering to the ground as he scrambled backward into the trees. The second man bolted, vanishing into the shadows, unwilling to face a man standing guard over his family. Only the white-haired man remained. He stepped forward, a twisted grin stretched across his pale face. No gun drawn, just a calm, cruel confidence that chilled the blood. "You don't even know what she is," he said. "But I do. I shaped her, broke her like a colt. She carries my blood whether you like it or not. She outgrew your nightmare," Jacob replied, raising his rifle without hesitation. "You're nothing but a shadow we've left behind." The man stepped closer. "Pull that trigger, and you'll never understand. You'll never know why she cries when it rains, why she flinches at raised hands, what she's been forced to carry. Another shot rang out. He dropped immediately. No more taunts, no more smirking, just silence and the thud of his body hitting the ground. Jacob advanced slowly. The man wasn't dead yet. The bullet had torn through his shoulder and sent him to the dirt. "I'll let the law deal with you," Jacob muttered, voice low and edged with restraint. Because if it were up to me, he left the rest unsaid. Sheriff Tannen arrived minutes later, deputies close behind. One of the men had been caught at the creek trying to escape. The white-haired man, blood soaking through his coat, was hauled into the back of the sheriff's wagon and sent to the nearest jail for holding. "You did what you had to do," the sheriff told Jacob. "You kept your family safe." But Jacob didn't feel victorious, just worn like something inside him had gone gray. Rachel stood at the edge of the porch, hand resting gently on Delilah's back. The girl hadn't spoken since the first shot. That night she curled tightly into Rachel's side, clutching her nightdress with white knuckles. "Mama," she whispered, her voice almost gone. "He said something before the guns." "What did he say, baby?" Rachel asked, heart already racing. "He said he left something behind. Said he wasn't done yet." Rachel stayed awake all night watching the fire burn low, wondering what else that man had hidden, what wounds still lay beneath Delilah's quiet. And just as dawn broke across the hills, Delilah sat up in bed. "I remembered something she said." Rachel rushed to her, brushing hair from her face. "What is it?" "He wasn't my daddy," Delilah said, voice steady. "He used to say he was, but he lied. I had a mama before him. She had brown hair like you. She sang to me." Rachel pulled her close eyes, stinging. "Maybe she's still out there," Delilah whispered. Rachel kissed her forehead gently. "She's here now, sweetheart. Right here in your heart." The days that followed didn't feel like regular time. They passed slowly, heavy with silence and healing, like each moment was a piece of something delicate being mended by hand. Delilah never spoke of the white-haired man again, not his name, not his voice, not the dreams, and Rachel never asked. Some truths needed time, others needed mercy. But there was a lightness now in the girl that hadn't existed before, a quiet lift in her laughter, a fuller embrace when she clung to the dog like he wasn't just her protector, but a piece of the home she'd finally found. Rachel had become that home, and Jacob, he was her anchor, solid, unshaken, a steady place in a world that used to spin too fast. Autumn arrived with a stillness neither of them had dared hope for. There were no more threats, no strange whistles in the night, just golden leaves tumbling across dry fields, the scent of corn husks and wood smoke in the air. Rachel returned to her kitchen, and Delilah never left her side. The girl helped measure flour shell beans, wipe eggs clean. She began humming tunes Rachel didn't recognize, maybe fragments of songs her first mother used to sing. She didn't call Rachel Mama again, not for a while, but the way she looked at her eyes full of trust and quiet knowing said more than any word could have. Then came the letter. It arrived without warning, tucked in the middle of the sheriff's mail. Tannen didn't recognize the seal, but as soon as he read it, his expression darkened. He saddled up and rode straight to the ranch. "I think this one's best read inside," he told Jacob, voice low and tense. Jacob took it, opened it slowly, read it once, then again. Behind him, Rachel stood with a hand on his shoulder, her fingers tightening as the words sank in. The letter wasn't from a stranger. It came from the white-haired man, the one who claimed to be Delilah's father. The same man who should have been rotting in a cell awaiting trial. Only he never made it that far. The letter had been mailed by a guard from Border County Jail, a guard who owed Jacob a favor. The prisoner never made it to trial. He died on the way, bleeding out, maybe from infection, or maybe something worse no one spoke of. Whatever the cause, he didn't live long enough to speak another threat. But tucked into his boot, the guard found a letter sealed, the writing rough and uneven, addressed simply to whoever finds her. Inside was a truth no one had prepared for. May hadn't just been taken, she'd been sold. Passed off under cover of grief by a man claiming to be her uncle after her mother's death, traded in secret to the white-haired stranger when she was only 5. The letter never explained why, only that she wasn't meant to remember, and she wasn't the only one. Rachel clutched the paper so tightly it crinkled in her hands. "There could be others," she whispered. Jacob nodded, and someone out there still looking for her. Sheriff Tannen pulled his hat down low. "I'll start asking around, dig through old reports, missing persons, anything that might connect her to her real name." But that night, Rachel couldn't find rest. She sat near the fire holding May close, her thoughts spinning with questions, who the girl once was and who she was becoming. The next morning, Jacob found Rachel at the edge of the field, eyes fixed on the horizon. "She deserves a name," Rachel said, her voice low. "She already has one. No, a full name. One that means something. One that says she's not just someone lost and found. She's our daughter now." Jacob didn't answer right away. He stepped beside her, the wind tugging gently at his collar. "I've been thinking about that too," he said, "and I remembered something." He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn piece of ribbon, faded blue fraying at the edges. She had this tucked in her dress when she came to us. I didn't think it mattered back then. He handed it to Rachel, and there, stitched into one corner in small, careful thread, were 2 letters, Emma. "Initials?" Rachel asked. "Maybe, but it's something." They brought it inside and let May hold it. She turned it over slowly in her hands, thoughtful, then looked up. "My name used to be May," she said softly. "Before. That's what she called me." "Who?" Rachel asked gently. "Your mama." The girl nodded. "She said I was born in spring, and she prayed I'd grow strong and kind." Rachel covered her mouth, tears rising fast and hot. From that day on, Delilah became May again, May Rose Harper. She wasn't just theirs in heart anymore. She was theirs in name. And as the seasons changed, so did the land. The ranch became more than a safe place. It became home, rooted in something deeper than blood, something chosen and held through fire, something that couldn't be undone. A year passed, then another. May grew taller, her hair longer, her laughter fuller. She devoured books like they were air, and she loved horses with a tenderness Rachel had never seen in a child. Jacob taught her to ride. Rachel taught her to bake. And together they showed her that not every shadow meant danger. Then came the spring of the 3rd year. A knock at the door, soft, careful, not rushed, not angry. Rachel opened it with Jacob at her side. A woman stood there, older, worn, clutching a folded newspaper clipping in both hands. "My name is Clara Ridge," she said. "I've been looking for my niece. She vanished when she was 5. From behind the kitchen door, May peeked out. The woman's hands trembled. The paper slipped from her fingers and she dropped to her knees. "May." The girl froze, then stepped forward, uncertain. They stared at each other long, unblinking, and Rachel knew. She saw it in the way May's eyes filled without blinking, in the way her hands shook as she reached forward. This wasn't just possible, it was true. the kind of truth that mends more than it breaks. Clara stayed a week. She told the story of her sister May's mother who died from fever. She spoke of the man who had taken May under the pretense of care, and she stayed long enough to see that May was safe now, surrounded by love. When she left, she did so with peace, and May remained because she wanted to. Because Rachel and Jacob hadn't just saved her, they'd claimed her in every way that mattered. Because family doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it's found. Sometimes it walks in carrying hurt, or arrives under stars on a tired horse, or stumbles out of nightmares and into arms that know how to hold steady. And sometimes it calls you mama before it even knows your name. Spring came once more to the ranch, soft and golden, like a promise whispered low instead of shouted loud. The wind no longer carried the sharp edge of warning. Instead, it moved soft through the fields, bringing with it the scent of tilled earth and wildflowers. And somewhere just beyond the ridge, birds had returned to nest beneath the chapel's eaves. Time had slipped by without fanfare, settling over them like a warm quilt, smoothing over what had once been raw and sharp. Grief had dulled. Fear had loosened its grip, but their memory lingered, not as an open wound, but as a sacred signpost, a quiet reminder of how far they'd come and how deeply grace had carried them. May Rose Harper had just turned 10. Rachel stood near the edge of the garden with a pie tin balanced on one hip and soil smudging the hem of her skirt. She watched as May chased a runaway hen through the yard, a book tucked securely beneath one arm. When the chicken disappeared into the tall grass, the girl didn't complain. She simply dropped into a patch of clover, cracked open her book, and began reading out loud each word, shaped carefully by her lips, like they were something holy. Rachel smiled, brushing her palms against her apron. "You've read that one 5 times already this week," she called out. May didn't look up. "It gets better every time." Jacob appeared across the yard, a saddle slung over one shoulder, hammer in the other, on his way to repair the eastern gate for the 3rd time this month. Though Rachel suspected he just liked having a reason to keep his hands busy. He tipped his hat toward the girl, then toward Rachel. She wrestling chickens again, or words this time. Bit of both by the looks of it. "My money's on the hen." Rachel laughed softly and turned back toward the porch. The railings were new, freshly painted white, and the windows had clean curtains. May's window especially covered inside with drawings full of color and motion, all sunshine and animals and wide blue skies. One showed a gray-bearded man holding a little girl's hand. Another featured a woman with a pie in one hand and a shepherd dog in the other. The last picture showed 3 figures gathered around a dinner table, smiling, drawn with big red hearts circling them. They were a family, not because a document said so, not because of blood or legal binding, but because of what they'd been through, what they'd chosen, what they'd built from the ashes. At night, May no longer woke crying. The nightmares had faded, muffled sobs buried under blankets replaced by peaceful sleep. She didn't often speak of what came before the barn, but sometimes she would quietly, carefully, as though the pain had changed shape into something she could hold without being crushed by it. One afternoon, while Rachel folded laundry on the porch, May sat beside her and asked, soft as breath, "Did God send me to you, or did He send you to me?" Rachel paused, her hands stilling on a shirt. "Maybe both," she answered. "Maybe we were each other's miracle." May gave a small nod, content with that answer, and helped smooth out the sheet beside her. In town, people still whispered about the girl, about the sheriff's part in bringing her home, about the house that burned the man who vanished without a name. But stories faded when endings were good, and the town had found new ones to tell about the girl who rode faster than most boys, who devoured 3 books in a week, who brought baked apples to the preacher's wife when her husband took sick. May had become something bright and unexpected, a little miracle in denim skirts and dust-covered boots. And miracles had a way of warming even the coldest corners of a town. Then a letter arrived that shifted everything again. Wrapped in plain brown paper, no return address, just one word written on the front, in careful script: May. Rachel opened it with Jacob beside her, her hands unsteady. Inside was no warning, no threat, just a photograph. A woman with soft chestnut hair, standing in a field of wildflowers, cradling a baby in her arms. On the back, in delicate cursive, was a single name, Charlotte Rose, her mother. There was no message, no explanation, but Rachel felt the truth in her chest, like something solid and deep-rooted. Someone somewhere had found a piece of the story and sent it not to reopen old wounds, but to fill the gaps with something whole. The wind carried softly through the fields, and beneath the quiet that followed, they all understood what was once shattered hadn't just been repaired, it had been made beautiful in the healing. The past had left its marks, carved its weight deep into them, but love had poured into every scar like gold and made something enduring where brokenness had once been. You know, writing this story left a mark on me. Not just because of the twists or the tension or even the fight scenes, but because at its heart, it's about something so deeply human, the longing to be safe, to be loved, and to be seen. Rachel's journey reminded me that healing isn't loud. It's quiet. It's in the way she stood between danger and a child who reminded her of her own past. It's in Jacob, a man who didn't try to save anyone, but instead chose to stand beside someone simply because it was the right thing to do. And little May, she's not just a survivor, she's proof that even when a life is broken, it can still bloom again. To me, the biggest lesson here is that family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who walks through the fire with you. It's the people who stay when things get ugly, who believe in your worth when you've forgotten it yourself. That's the kind of love this world needs more of, steady, quiet, and unshakably human. I poured my heart into this one because I believe stories like this matter. They remind us of the goodness that still exists, even when the world feels dark. If this story moved you the way it moved me, I'd love to hear what part hit you hardest. Was it Rachel's strength, Jacob's quiet loyalty, or May's healing? Let's talk about it in the comments, I read everyone. And hey, if you've ever felt like Rachel or May, just know you're not alone. Thanks for sticking around till the end. See you in the next one.